So for the today's event, I have a manifesto I want to read for all of you. And also I wrote a text to share with all of you, which is kind of long, like 10 minutes, a 10-minute kind of thing. End of the text, I am proposing few questions for my audience so we can proceed into a conversation in relation to the manifesto I'm reading and the text I'm reading for all of you. So I'll start with the manifesto. So the title of the manifesto is Manifesto from a Third World Artist. Capitalism alone divides us, socially, economically, and philosophically. Today, I want my voice to raise, the voice of a third world artist. I'm not interested in knowing you. You equals the capitalist propaganda of what art and life should look and how it should be consumed. Why I need my third world voice to be heard? Because it should be heard. No, it's not bringing you any new news, any native narrative, or any history of trauma. Neither it promises you any new opportunities to inspire any incomprehensible news. Our voice should be heard, because if it is not heard now, it won't be heard at all. Do I look like a problem to you, first world? Because my product for you is a product from a third, non-consumable. The bitter test of life and a third world destitute, migration, which is a transported myth of our ancestors. Like a bird, 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 and like a bird. Capitalism, the art of act should be against you. If you can hear, if you must and should can hear the voice of this third world destitute artist, you must know you are not functioning enough to sustain. Your art is a death trap. Against equality, our liberation has not yet proclaimed. Against just undoing the gender, the bitter test of knowing ourselves. The text I'm reading, the title of the text is Desire, Exile, and Anxiety. These days, I often wonder about the word brave. When someone comes to me and says, "You are so brave," I wonder about what do they actually mean by saying that? Is that supposedly an effort to end a conversation? Like a statement for me. And brave is the only term that could use to explain me. Or brave is the full stop word for people who couldn't just connect to me with their empathy and solidarity. I wish I could rather listen from people like, "I never knew someone like you. How can I help you? How can I contribute to your life and share my responsibility of being a human in this world? How can I play my role of being privileged and visible person in this planet? Do you need something to sustain more in life? Please know I am and we are with you." I met many people these days who never met someone like me before, and I wanted them to understand we exist in this world. And maybe I'm an opportunity for you to know more people who are like me. Yes, please don't stop me just by saying I am brave. I am something less and more than brave. I never wanted to be brave. I wanted to be a person, a legitimate citizen of this society who can be brave and can choose not to be brave and can be vulnerable also. Please look at my vulnerability and don't just stop me by tagging me as brave. Please look at your own subjectivity and look at me and then think of our collective belonging and how vulnerable we are in every moment. We don't choose to be brave or work to be brave. We choose to be vulnerable, and accepting our vulnerability and subjectivity can be your radical approach of solidarity and compassion. Today, I want to talk about exile, queer displacement, belonging, desire, and anxiety. I also want you all to question yourself why you all are here today. Hopefully you all have your answer, but I don't have mine. And maybe this is the question for my exile, and I'm constantly trying to gather some answer to satisfy the people around me and why I'm here in America. Through my work, art, activism, and interaction. From a random interaction in a bus station to a queer intimacy on a gay sauna, the one common question I get always asked is, where are you from? The answer I knew is getting unknown for me every day, so I kept silent without replying this question. My body is always questioned in this land. So my queerness is. My vulnerability is questioned as I'm not fitting into the normalized category and socially passed body in America. One of my performance pieces, No One Home, was initiated because of my experience of staying in America as a displaced brown queer person. What is home for us? Is home a physical territory, or a mental territory, or a social construction? Do we really belong to the same home in all of our life, or is just another nostalgia of a past memory? Is America my new home, or is it still Dhaka where I want to go back every day? In the reality, Dhaka doesn't exist anymore in my life, but America does. But as a person who have a racialized, gendered identity in America, claiming a space as a home is not as easy as is often advertised. In a capitalist neoliberal state, my body is often looked as a vulnerable other. This body is threatening and alienated, especially in the contemporary American context. So what's then? I'm claiming an utopian space as my home where no one belongs except me, like No One Home. No One Home was designed as a pop-up interactive performance space where I claimed my performance space as my home and welcomed people to have an appointment with me to visit the space. Participants were invited to sign up for a 10 to 15-minute one-on-one appointment with me. For an 8-hour duration of time, I have met 86 white Americans in last 1 year. People in a small town in Maine, where many of them experienced a brown queer artist for the first time of their life. Big city Chicago, where I started No One Home first on the Lower East Side in New York City. It always pushed me to think about the necessity of a collective empathy, which we are lacking. During the appointment of the performance, I make a personal, spontaneous conversation with my visitor about their memory of home, their trauma, and give them time to open up to me about themselves. I also embodied a persona who do not have any past experience or memory, no context of the space, desire, and gender. Audience visitor can define who I am on performance or where I am from or what name I should have. I present my body as a mirror reflection of my audience. The primary intention behind the performance project was the state of otherness. I have a feeling and I question myself every morning when I wake up on my bed, where I am. Every time my body steps outside, the state of otherness dominates my interaction with people around me. Is it a state of disconnection also? This struggle of wanting to be connected with the dominant culture makes me inferior. I'm constantly in search of finding a way on how to get along with this otherness. Should I try more? Or I should just accept the fact that I would be othered everywhere? I have survived my body, a sexualized body persona, from Bangladesh to the US. I have lost my native land and still looking for a land to accept my body, my queerness. But also the state of not having a country, here country as a physical territory, is not only my story. There is a linked story of my family and many other friends in today's global context. As one of my friends told me one day, as a queer, our country is our body. This statement makes me think about the anxiety of selfhood and whether a body could be a symbol of a transnationalism. In the context of 2017-18 contemporary America, I'm thinking more and more about the rise of the ethnic nationalism, anxieties with border, and the violence against the LGBTQ people around the world. What does the global war influence on our sex and sexuality? Is gender identity, LGBTQ rights, and aggressive nationalism interconnected? How is the rise of religious nationalism in South Asia entangled with American politics and policy? The notion of desire and border, queer anxieties with border, and how we claim and control these territories, how the global LGBTQ community facing and surviving the threat of terror. And quite frankly, in America, or precisely North American context, queer sense is now in a danger of becoming a depoliticized commodity fetish, as Marx warned us before. Over the past few years, I've survived through my art, or perhaps non-art. Producing new work and looking for new idea become a part of my survival mechanism, where the goal is always not so clear. As I always say, I make art to survive. I don't have the luxury to make art anymore. The commitment of producing, performing, creating, thinking, and establishing new ideas becomes a key driven force to move forward, where sometimes not necessarily I'm always looking to achieve something. I knew I have to do it to survive, and making art became the instinct for me. As my works are driven by my experience of growing up in Bangladesh as a queer and living in the capital Dhaka in a very heteronormative class-based society, one of the most densely populated mega cities in the world, Dhaka shaped me as a person and pushed me towards my politically motivated creative process. In the context of a religiously conservative Bangladesh, where sex is a taboo, sexual diversity is a sin, and often talking about sex only happen in the closed door elite discussion, I was motivated through my own grassroots activism to produce work in public spaces and bringing this issue of queer suffering to the discussion table of the mass audience. In 2016, 47 people in Dhaka, including bloggers, writers, freethinkers, and religious minority group members, were hacked to death by Muslim extremist group in Bangladesh, which later claimed their association with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. On April 25, 2016, while visiting a friend with others, 6 extremists barged into the apartment with machetes and killed 2 of my friends in front of me. I escaped from that building and from that incident. And after being in a safe house for 2 months, I came to America on June 28, 2016 for an uncertain self-exile. Coming to America was depressing and traumatic, but also this new experience forced me to think deeply about trauma, the history of trauma, consumerism, racial aggression, displacement, isolation, body politics, and social privilege. In many ways, I am an alien in America. I didn't came to America to pursue an American dream, like many other immigrants comes here. I came here because I had to choose between life and death, and America was the opposite of life for me. Having been here for over the last 3 years, my work and visual narrative have moved into a very new direction. My recent work addresses the discomfort of being a person who lives and works in the United States as an alienated person. Like one of my show title, I'm othered everywhere. And America made me realize resistance is a global phenomenon. America is beautiful with its own absurdity, but also I'm dismayed to see the increasing racial injustice and the lack of human interaction here. I started thinking about white desire because of my many racial encounters here in America. These experiences lead me to ponder how white desire wants to see a brown queer suffering or to appropriate a body. More precisely, a brown queer body experience. White desire wants to validate its opinion and like to see itself as an authority. These problematic tendencies of white culture and its interconnection to the brown queer suffering became the initiator of my current practice, Exile series, Rising Sadness. Exile made me rethink of mobility and the loneliness and the capital of global north, where in capitalism, everything has an opportunity to become commodified. So as queerness is. Mobility is an issue not only for me, but rather every cultural producer and worker who are from global south and trying to sustain in global north. We need to question and rethink about the visibility politics and the fail of the queer politics in global north. Who can afford to be queer? Is queerness becoming increasingly as an identity for the marginalized community which is not accessible in North America? Is queer desirability is getting trapped into the normative social standard of beauty, and as a community, are we often marginalizing the non-Western diasporic body, also known as queerness? How can we look at queerness as a possibility and not thinking of it as a fixed idea? So that was my manifesto and the statement. I hope you were able to hear. The sound was clear. Yes. So maybe we can proceed into a conversation now.
Sure. Is there a way of having a little bit of light so that Ali can see? Sure. And just I can see people. People want to respond. Sandra, maybe we did. I just wait for the lights to go up a little. Yeah, just working on it. Okay. Oh, really? I'm sorry. Do you want to start? Yeah, so sure. This is filmmaker Chandra Siddhan.
Yeah.
Who's gonna?
I totally enjoyed and appreciated your performance, and I was particularly I love the way you concluded it. That to see queerness as a possibility and not as something fixed.
Can you hear? Can you hear?
I can hear, yes.
Okay,
so I was hoping to hear a little more about that concluding lines that you said.
So your question is, you'd like to know more about why I said queerness as a possibility?
Yes, as a possibility and not as something fixed, yeah.
Because my idea and my experience with queerness is very much different than the North American queer, dominant queer culture, right? So I would like to, all right, should I speak?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Queerness is a possibility in a mean that queerness can include more people, queerness can accommodate more marginalized voice, rather than queerness being a fixed idea, what queerness should look like. Even the non-binary community in United Global North, or the cis gay men's community, which is the dominant queer community in Global North. It's interesting for me and sometimes annoying for me to see how excluding these communities are for more marginalized voice, even the diasporic communities are. From that sense, I was using queerness as a possibility to initiate a space and a community which can accommodate more people, rather than it's being fixed for a group of people who only fall into the category of what queerness should look like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. As a kind of a diversity, as a kind of an infinitely diversifying expression, right?
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about public space and how, because so much of your work used to be in the public space, and now that you've sort of moved, how you experience public space differently, how you think of public space as aesthetic material differently?
So when I started working on street, which is like you are referring to, public space, because public space was my studio. So I never had a studio before coming to America, before I became a residence artist and came to grad school and everything. I never had a studio on my BFL. So the public space was my studio. So I used to perform there and document those things, and my public was audience. They were never invited to see the performance. They are the random spectator who are there. It's their space, and I'm going to their space and doing my performance for them, which is, I feel like, very common South Asian or the region I came from. It's a thing there. If I look at the history of performativity on the space in South Asia or in Bangladesh, performance always happen in a public space. Performance never happen in a theater, because theater is a Western concept. Performance, theater, being in a space where the audience will go to see something, that institutional idea of performance is a very Western notion in South Asia. So, and I'm from that place. So it came as a very spontaneous thing that yes, that's how performance should look like. That's how performance should happen, because I'm working on people, working for people, working for a community, and I should reach out to the community and I should activate the space rather than inviting them to, in a kind of isolated, separate space where I'm activating with them. Now, when in North American context, that's how things work there. Even if I want to work outside, there is the problem. My body is vulnerable. Even if I walk on the street, one of the person I knew, he always says that, remember, we are always performing, which I find really interesting for me, because I always have to perform. Like, I'm performing in designated space sometime in America. Like, people are invited, they are coming to see me, and they're coming as a designated spectator. But most of the time I'm performing my gender, I'm performing my racial identity, I'm performing my ethnic minority identity. So I'm always performing. So maybe in other sense, I'm also performing in public spaces, because when I'm on the metro, when I'm on the bus line, when I'm having racial encounter, when people are screaming at me, they are performing with me. My performance is making them vulnerable, so they're reacting towards my performance. So maybe I'm too much intellectualizing the idea, your question, what you said, but I don't see much difference. I just see maybe I wasn't conscious about the performative aspect of a gendered body before when I was in Bangladesh, and I'm more aware of it because of that marginalized tag and the way identity politics, so-called identity politics, works in North American context.
Ali, you showed us some slides of various performances.
Yeah.
Here, I wanted if you could talk a little bit about those works and what they were doing, a little bit about the context and how.
So let me go back to the screen sharing. So for this performance, so I worked with community in Bangladesh for good 5-6 years, and there is, it's a community doesn't mean only LGBTQ community, it's a community of artists, activists, architects, filmmaker, musician, everyone is together, right? It's not very institutionalized here in America. So for this specific performance, Abhijit Roy, who is an American Bangladeshi blogger and free thinker, he was hacked into the death on the street of University of Dhaka on the site by a group of people carrying machete in 2015, if I'm not, 2014. And for this is a documentation of a series performance I did after Abhijit Roy murder happened. I went back to the specific space, specific site, and this is the street where Abhijit Roy was murdered. I go back to the street, I hold a book of Taslima Nasrin and a book by Tagore, and Tagore is a cultural icon in Bengal. Everyone kind of, Tagore is unquestionable, but Abhijit is questionable because Abhijit is questioning the norms of 2015-14, that time in Bangladesh. Or Taslima was questioning the norm. So I make a performance in the public space with no, and on that, the space where Obijit Rai was murdered, there is government rule that you cannot gather people. So as a consequences of my performance, I actually get arrested under detention by police for a few hours because they didn't understand what is this weird task is happening. I smoke weed on the space. I read loud Tagore, and then I burned Taslima and Obijit's book, and I use the ashes to purify my body. If you know the Muslim ritual of purifying body before they go to the prayer. So I purify my body with the ashes and then take a prayer as a half-naked person in the middle of the street in front of people. So that was my performance protest. And this is the third part of the performance. There is two other part of doing, of this performance. It's called The Virus of Faith, because that was the name of Obijit's book, Virus of Faith. So this is one of that performance, Virus of Faith. This is for a summit, which is a kind of largely funded elite arts fair in Bangladesh. And actually the initiator of this summit, they're coming to Toronto, I believe, next week to speak about this summit. So they invited me to produce a performance piece for the Dhaka Art Summit. And after talking with the curator, I decided to create a gender-free zone. And you have to understand it's an open summit. Anyone can come. It's not a ticketed art fair. Anybody and everybody can come. There is audience, there's security guard or the high school student, mass people who never experienced performance art, but also there is people who are the curator of the Tet Modern. This performance was reviewed by Hans Ulrich Obrist because he was happened to be on the fair, or the Princess of Dubai or something like that. So it's a mixture of the audience, not one kind of audience. It's art audience, elite audience, and also just mass people who just wanted to see what's happening in this building. For this performance, an interactive performance for which goes for 4 days long. Each day I perform for 6 hours. I go inside this zone, this marked zone, and activate the space with my body. I actually don't do much. I place my body and invite my audience to interact with me. They can come inside the zone. They can give me a phone call, give me a text message. They can email me. They can Facebook message me. And they can give me direction what I should do on this performance piece. So on the specific moment you are seeing on the slide that I'm naked, because that was initiated by one of my audience members. One of the audience member gave me a text message that I wanted to see you naked. So I was naked for like 4 or 5 minutes. Then someone else came and put all this flower and tapped down my genitals. And also it's created controversy because I was banned from the local art organization in Bangladesh. I was blacklisted because this is the first time nudity is happening on the public place. I was attacked, I was verbally attacked by a few of my audience members because what this crazy thing I'm doing. But also it was very popular, like everyone loved it, international community. I get reviewed in many international magazines, which helped on my art career in letters. So this is a gender-free zone in Dhaka Art Summit, which ran for a few days. This is another site public performance in Dhaka. It's called Bodily 6 Hour. I often do long durational performance. So that time I wanted to try figure out something else. And this is also very early time when I just started doing performance. So I laid down a big piece of paper, which is big. You cannot see the whole thing in the paper, and my body only get activated when the audience comes and when the audience makes some sounds for me. Then my body only active and make all these gestural marks on this piece of paper. So you're seeing people are trying to activating me who are my audience. They're clapping and some of them are giving whistle, because if they do that, then my body moves and creates these marks on this piece of paper. This is the Othered Everywhere show in Chicago, in Defibrillator, where I actually started doing the No One Home performance piece. I have many other performance pieces, but I deliberately didn't add those slides here because I really wanted to talk about No One Home and the work I'm produced in America rather than many of the work which produced in Bangladesh, because those are more contextually grounded in Bangladesh, and I have to talk a lot more to explain only the context rather than the material of the work. As I said on my text, why I started doing No One Home, because No One Home was what I experienced in America, not having home, feeling of I don't know what this state of not having home is, and like answering people all the time, like where I'm from. That was the initiator of the No One Home, and the No One Home happened in different places in Maine, in New York, in Chicago also. It's happened for 8 hours. I go into a space and occupy the space for 8 hours. I invite people beforehand, before I go to the space, to sign up with me. People have to give some basic information about themselves to me, like who they are, what their name, what their occupation is. And I met this person for 15 minutes. And for the 15 minutes, I don't designate anything, any task for myself. It's up to them, my audience, what task they want me to do. And I also do a self-created persona. I claim myself as a system, the system who is designed by the artist, the system who doesn't have a name, the system who doesn't have a gender, sexuality, nationality, the system who doesn't know what's happening outside of the room or the world, because that's the home for the system. And the system only function if the audience initiates some task with the system. So kind of playing with this kind of absurd idea of spectator versus the performer. The performer is not performing unless the spectator initiating the performance.
Okay. Oh.
Yes, if you have a question.
I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about what you would have done if you were actually able to be here, the Exile.
I was, Exile Series Rising Sadness, that was a gestural body performance. I'm working with the material white flour, the bleached white flour from the supermarket. So I do this gestural performance where I made a circle and put the white, bleached white supermarket cheap flour all over my body, and kind of transforming my body into an object, white object. So that was my plan for doing it for OCAD. But it's pretty hard to do it online over the cam, because like I'm doing it, but nobody is seeing it, because the people have to see it. People have to see it intensely, how the body gets transformed with the bleached white flour. So that was my plan for that.
A lot of your art practice is about audience interaction and audience engagement. I'm wondering if there's any moments or memories that you have of interactions that have stuck with you, or were transformative, or remain kind of in your memory.
I have many. I used to perform for public, many, like I would perform and people will come and see me. But my current practice, I'm more interested into not performing. I'm more interested into having one-to-one interaction with my audience, or doing it for a limited amount of audience, which I did for No One Home. Now I do performance lecture for by invitation audience only. So for No One Home, it was very interesting because many people get so vulnerable, because this often this performance is not documented. Because if you come to my performance and by making an appointment, if you don't give me the permission, I don't do any documentation, except like I will ask for a photo release, and if you allow me, then I'll do it. So what happened when there is no documentation, people react in a very different way in a performance space. Their behavior gets changed. And when I'm giving them the authority that I can do anything with me, they often get so vulnerable. They started sharing with their personal issues. I almost sometimes feel like I'm becoming the counselor. Some of them start crying. Some of them even shared some of their deepest vulnerable thought, which I don't want to share because that's their personal secret. I don't feel any of them was very transformative, but I also started realizing as a performer of what agency and the power I have in a performance space, and I have to deal with it more carefully. That was one of the realization actually by doing one-to-one interaction. But it's always interesting having people in a one-to-one interactive performance space. I also ended up meeting some of the people because I request them if they want to talk with me after the performance, they can also leave their contact and I contact them afterhand, and then I go for coffee or I go for lunch with them to have a more detailed discussion to investigate what their experience was on the performance piece. And not always I'm doing all this investigation by knowing what I'm doing. It's a kind of a self-exploration also, that why I'm performing. I started doing performance as a spontaneous performance artist, right? I wasn't a very performance pedagogy, knowledgeable, academia or anything like that. So it's kind of a self-investigation, most of my performance piece, that connecting with people, making the community, trying to making the community who have a similar understanding of life, no matter what our skin color, racial background, or where we are from. It's hard to do sometimes because people, we don't look at our own subjectivity. The thing I was talking in my text, we should look at our own subjectivity and turn it on into a radical form of solidarity, because that's what's missing, and empathy doesn't comes spontaneously unless you look upon your own subjectivity. So lots of the question I'm throwing now, lots of this comes from this one-to-one interaction, that how I'm analyzing the idea of the performer. Performer is not the entertainer. Performer is the explorer. Performer is the someone who initiates a space where people can get vulnerable. Is it okay? It's totally okay to be vulnerable. I'm talking about the word brave because I feel like there is this unrealistic expectation in our society that everyone have to be very strong and motivated and brave and courageous and everything. And I'm talking about, is it okay if you are a person like me, if you are a deeply vulnerable emotional person, it's okay to be that vulnerable emotional person, and there is nothing wrong on that. And also that's what altering heteronormativity, because heteronormativity often connect bravery, courageousness, and all these good masculine things that associate masculinity. And I struggle with masculinity because I'm not a masculine person at all, though I was biologically born as a man. So I feel like it's very important to alter this narrative that I don't have to be brave. I can be a deeply vulnerable person only, because of whatever experienced in my life. And that's totally all right to be that person.
Onsite is connected to a university, to OCAD University.
Yes.
You're now in a university. You've had to go back. You didn't actually choose to go back to school, but circumstances also forced you to go back to school. So I'm wondering how that re-entering into grad school has perhaps changed your performance and also the way you think about performance and your artwork.
I always wanted to come back to the grad school. I didn't knew I wanted to come back to grad school for a performance program. So there is multiple point I need to address on this question, like coming back to grad school. First of all, I came back. I'm now at SAIC. I'm doing these things from SAIC performance department. So I have access in many things. I have an institutional access that I gained, which was unimaginable for me even 3 years ago, thinking of I can come in a very commercial university environment like Art Institute of Chicago, where tuition is like super high, I cannot even afford. But after coming back in, the best thing happened is I feel like I'm safe and guarded by a group of people who empathize and understand, and some wonderful community of people who really think about work. I spend every day 9-10 hours from morning to night in my studio, or I'm in a class, or I'm talking with someone, and everyone is artist, everyone is thinking about art, no matter how intellectual they are and how good or bad their work, how established or non-established they are. But I'm surrounded by a group of people who are continuously thinking of art, trying to making work, struggling with the notion of what artists should be in 2018-19 contemporary American context, right? Because it's hard to be an artist. Exploring that thing and having the privilege of exploring that thing, that's the most interesting experience for me coming back to grad school in an art school environment. Yes, because I was a part of a rural academia before in Maine, in University of Maine. That was a very vastly different experience than what I'm experiencing at SAIC. So it's good in a sense that I have that access, institutional access, and I can speak what I want to speak. When people sometimes critique, I'm getting engaged into intellectual conversation, and I'm looking at it as a way of growing up as a person, as an artist. But also there is negative part of it. It's not diverse. It's like very hegemonic. It's a very elite. It's only if you have certain access on money and if your family can do the education for then you can come to these institutions. It's less about merit. It's more about what money and power and privilege. So in that sense, it's very less diverse.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us. And again, so sorry you couldn't actually be here to perform. I'm kind of imagining this place covered with white flour, and I'm sad that you're not here doing it. But hopefully, that visa, which is stuck somewhere somewhere we don't really know, will come through, and maybe at least you'll be able to come up informally and visit with us.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. And thanks so much I have to tell everyone that Richard is the person who kept in touch with me during the time when I was on Safe House in Bangladesh. Haven't met Richard in person yet, but he is a super generous person, so as many other people in the world. And that's the biggest blessing in life, that the biggest support in life, that you can feel you are getting supported by people who cares about your work, whatever weird work or crazy work you are trying to make, or whatever thing you are trying to claim as your art. And that's very necessary in this world right now for anyone like me, to have that community of people, have that amount of people who can support your work and make you feel like you are not doing something wrong, you are doing something maybe right. Yes.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us again.